Friends, in this video I will show you where the target of the final decline in cryptocurrency, where you can consider midterm entries and what the targets are for the subsequent growth, and we will analyze all of this using four main coins. These are Bitcoin, Ethereum, BNB, and Solana. So don't miss out, watch until the end, there will be a lot of interesting things. And we will start from the very beginning, that is with the higher timeframe markup and why in fact we have arrived at this target. For those who follow my releases back in January, I talked about the fact that the target for Bitcoin's decline is within the range. 57.71, this is the accumulation that has been developing over the past 5 years. And in fact, this is exactly where we have arrived. However, note that we will not be able to break through this zone on the first attempt. In any case, we will need a correction. This means that even now, we can outline two scenarios in which the correction will take shape. The first and most pessimistic scenario is if our subsequent correction forms a triangle. But even in this case, if you buy at the bottom, your purchases will remain in profit, meaning you can exit at the right moment without any losses. This particular markup and idea are based on the assumption that the sideways movement will be prolonged over time. And for exactly the same period of time as the decline lasted, you will observe the crypto market moving sideways. Accordingly, this is a sign that you should exit and our purchases have not justified themselves. Nevertheless, there is accumulation happening in the upper part. Very often, such a return occurs in Bitcoin after a top is formed and it is at the level of 97. That is, during the formation of wave B, we may see a return to the 97 mark before the decline continues. It is very important to note here, and about this, I already mentioned this in previous videos and it's essential. Right here there will be a prompt so you can go back to it and rewatch the whole thing. And the higher we rise within wave B, within the upward correction, the smaller the targets will be for the subsequent decline. So ideally, for crypto enthusiasts, those who are into crypto, we move higher, return to this zone, and then essentially we're ready to take off further. However, I remind you that all the interesting movement will only start forming in the fourth quarter of 2026, so be patient. And for those actively trading crypto, you'll have to trade the correction during this period, so be careful. So, friends, getting back to the lower timeframes, we're now on the 4-hour chart. This is the chart. Total. This is the cryptocurrency market capitalization. Our movement is forming as a three-wave pattern to the downside, and in this movement, since we don't have a divergence, I assume that we could see one final decline. In other words, right now the scenario looks like this. We have either already finished, which is unlikely, or we are going to form an additional final decline. What does this depend on? The thing is, if we evaluate the internal structure, then if we really want to, we can already find a completed 5-wave pattern. And we can see the same picture in Bitcoin itself. So we can identify a completed impulse. However, if we're talking about Bitcoin, in this case, the angle of view is important where we start the markup from. And in fact, in this situation, there is a possibility of one more downward move in order to complete this 5-wave pattern. If we go back to the total market capitalization chart, the situation is generally similar. And considering it as a moving correction within roughly the same time range, we have the current consolidation in wave 4. Accordingly, if we break out of our VL uncertainty channel in the opposite direction, we get a signal to the upside indicating that the correction is over, and essentially this is the buying zone. This will be the case for every coin we review, so don't switch off. Watch until the end. So, let's begin. Starting with Bitcoin. Speaking of Bitcoin, the breakout level for us is 75,000 on Binance. And if the price drops, there are several scenarios here. That is, we could form a triangle and then break downward from it. We could form a triangle, make a false breakout upward, and then accordingly move downward. In that case, the last extreme point of the triangle can be considered as an entry point for a short position, targeting the levels of 58,300 and 52,400. Next, we also have the scenario of a 3-wave pattern and a false breakout to the 75 level, also on I. A breakout in the opposite direction, either of the trend line or our previous extreme, gives us a trading signal. So remember, we have a target below which is determined by the levels 1.13 and 1.61. This is based on the size of the correction that has formed here. And there is a breakout in the opposite direction of the median channel, which we consider as confirmation of a reversal. We are doing the same thing now with the other coins. The first is Ethereum. Here, it's exactly the same story. The probability of a final decline is absent. There's a divergence, consolidation is happening, kind of a slight squeeze towards the minimum. Here we use pitchforks to confirm the breakout in the opposite direction. This is the 2300 level. If we break through 2300, we have the potential to return to 3800 within the next 6 months, again as part of a correction. However, don't forget that visually a triangle is currently forming here. And above all, this is a signal of compression to the downside, which in fact should lead to another update. The next coin we have is Binance, and here it's the same situation. In other words, in this case, when we assess the volumes, we don't see any particularly significant zones at all. That is, it's the current consolidation that we have here and a zone much higher up. So how do we proceed here? Here, we take the opposite approach. Here, for wave 4, we have targets of 38 to 50%. That is, we shouldn't go beyond 38% within the current correction. A false breakout is allowed, but not further than that. In terms of targets, we also build the FIB here, and our levels are 560 and 513. Moving on. Speaking of SOL, the situation here is the same. Here the volume zone serves as confirmation of a reversal. This is the 101.5 level. If the downward scenario plays out, it will have targets at the same levels for us. That's 64.5 and 50. And after that, there will be a reversal. Therefore, as a logical final conclusion, I can say that we are facing a situation where another decline is still possible. And actually, it may be of interest to you as holders. If you are planning to take a trade for the medium term, then depending on the structure and how the correction develops further, the scenario showed that yes, you will either end up with a small profit or you can make very good money on the price pullback on the previous accumulation, essentially due to market manipulation, which will suggest that we are supposedly continuing to grow, but in reality, this movement will be false. That's all from me, friends. Let me remind you that there is a link to my Telegram channel below this video where you can regularly find similar analytics on a daily basis for crypto and other markets and in fact make money from it. This was Dimitri with you. Thank you and goodbye to everyone.